So a warm welcome to this webinar hosted by Hong Kong Chamber of Commerce in Sweden. And today's program is, we have myself, Hanna Raftell, and Mateo Florez will host this sort of lunch hour session. We'd like to start with just some housekeeping as per usual. We're trying to get the cameras working, and we will also ensure that you have access to the chat. And please feel free to ask any questions in the chat or write down your questions as we go along. Happy to take them as they come in or towards the end. We also encourage any raised hands and we'll address any questions coming up or thoughts, comments, or what have you. So let's keep it quite as interactive as possible, because we are not that many on this. I would also like to highlight that this session is being recorded, so everyone is aware of that. And we have booked an hour for this webinar, but I think we'll keep sort of 30-40 minutes, hopefully, and then we'll go into more sort of questions. Let's start now, I think, with a short introduction. And Mateo, why don't you kick that off, and then I can make myself known as well to the audience. So Mateo, please.
Hi, thank you, Hanna. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, so Mateo Florez is my name. I've been working with digital assets now for, I will say, 3 years working with digital assets. I've known of digital assets and DLT, blockchain, and in a crypto world since 5 years ago. It all started when I was writing a paper about the Swedish e-krona in school, actually, or at University KTH, where I was studying computer science. And it all started from there. I started getting interested in the technology and the things you can do with the digital assets and this sort of programmatic, money and smart contracts. It sounded very cool. It's the concept of, interchanging value the same way you can interchange information nowadays in a secure manner sounded very interesting. So I started looking into that, and that ended up in me having to work at Trust Anchor Group, which is a technology partner making the world a smarter place, digitalizing the next generation of internet and helping companies and businesses with the journey into the next generation of internet, so to speak. There I have a role as a head of digital assets, where I help clients from idea to realization to create and launch the digital assets.
Fantastic. So back to Hanna again. So my background is really in banking and finance, and I got really curious with the whole digital assets, including crypto, but blockchain as a technology and distributed ledger technology as a part of the paradigm shift in banking and finance to see a more decentralized systems. And that also clearly drove me right into the whole Web3 space, including metaverse, and have been following the space now for a number of years. And I also resided in Hong Kong for 10 years between 2006 and 2016. And coming back to Sweden, I recognized that for sure there have been some tremendous fintech companies born and sprung out of Sweden and the Nordics. But when it came to the space of, shall we say, applied blockchain technology into the financial industry, I find that Sweden was definitely behind. So with that, I also like to link, and we'll come back to that, why we're doing this with regards to Hong Kong Chamber. But now my focus is very much also on impact and sustainable investments as part of a private equity firm residing in Madrid that's called Onboard Impact. And also then for me, a great opportunity to look at the economics and the financials from the perspective of both the technology and then obviously from an economics and capital allocation. The keywords here being transparency and traceability, and we'll for sure come back to that. But that's kind of where I am at the moment. So with that, let's just connect back to the connection to Hong Kong. I don't know, Mateo, if you would like to comment on why we're hosting this with regards to Hong Kong Chamber.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Hong Kong or China in general, but I will say Hong Kong specifically has done some really good progress when it comes to Web3 and also the metaverse. But so recently, the Hong Kong Financial Secretary Paul Chan actually published a blog post, and very supportive of Web3 and the metaverse, and talking about the roadmap and the fintech roadmap, encouraging greater use of AI and DLT in the financial sector, particularly for banks. But talking about this progress into AI and the DLT and blockchain and Web3 adoption. So there's a really clear and really supportive incentives in Hong Kong when it comes to digital assets and when it comes to AI, for instance. He mentioned a few cases, a very interesting one, which was farmers digitally tagging their livestock, which in order will enable them to track the animals and create this transparent and traceable log of transactions, basically, of the livestock with the help of IoT. So creating, with digital assets, creating this immutable transactional log of livestock, basically.
Thanks for that, Mateo. So just to also ensure that we stay on topic and just to relate back to the audience what we are going to discuss here, we're really talking about the blockchain and digital assets, right? As boosting the transparency for particularly climate issues, but clearly it can be applied to many different sectors and causes of use. We also want to dig deeper into distributed ledger technology, blockchains as such, and perhaps also clarify the difference between the two. And here we have some video.
Way. Thank you, Anton, for solving that.
Very good.
Excellent. Great
Cool.
to see you, Hanna.
Thank you. Likewise. And we also want to explore the decentralized systems, right, in the Web3, and how that sort of reshapes governance and economies. I think we're kind of assuming a bit of background knowledge in all these sort of, so we say, lingos, and hopefully the audience knows something about these things in terms of just being curious on what it can do and sort of take the next step. So we, rather than spending too much time on defining the concepts perhaps, we'd like to spend more time in the applications of it. And there we quickly come into things like interoperability and just general what the difference is between the blockchain and the distributed ledger technology, and also about the openness and between the various protocols, etc. So with that, I can also inform that the chat now is working, so that's perfect. So with that, maybe we can just kick off, Mateo, with let's at least define Web3 as we see it, right?
Yeah, sure, definitely. So for me, like I was talking in the beginning there, for me, the vision of Web3 and this next generation of internet is, so when you think about Web3, especially for someone that haven't heard the lingo or the reference, you will instantly think about what is Web2 and what is Web1, right? So this is something that it's kind of tricky, Web2, I would say, simplistically, is the web of information, right? You can start to interact with information, you can send messages, you can pay, for instance, and all of that. And Web3 is kind of the internet of value. So for me, the vision of Web3 and digital assets is the possibility to share, to buy, and to sell, for instance, assets and value the same way you do information today. So instantly, secure, and across the globe in a in a very secure and, like I said, instant manner. So interacting with value and assets online the way you do information today. That's for me Web3, and that's what got me into this whole digital assets realm and digital assets ecosystem, the beauty of interacting with value.
No, super cool, and very much along those lines is my thinking, and hence we're here together. I think as much as we like to disagree at times, right? But when I look at companies, and I'm thinking companies, industrial companies, for example, with hard and very tangible assets, it still remains a lot of intangible assets, in not least in terms of data. And I think any company and any board today that oversee these companies has an obligation towards its shareholders to consider how to sort of, should we put the word monetize these assets, but definitely looking at ways to extract further value of these intangible assets. And that's, to me, what the Web3 in a unique way allows. And the fact that in today's economic, well, in all the different new economic structures as such, we're talking much more about ecosystems. But in those ecosystems, we have various stakeholders. And never before, I think, we have had such complexities where one day someone can be a partner, the next day it can be a competitor, and then for all means being a customer. It's so taking all these different roles at the same time. So there we easily come into how to keep the ecosystem and the various stakeholders alive through various incentives, right? Because no one will act on their own without having some sort of what's in it for me. I think that's the reality.
Yeah, definitely. And when it comes to, like you said, monetization, I mean, one of the biggest adopters of technology has been monetization. So how can every stakeholder win within this ecosystem? And that's what tokenization, for instance, and digital assets allows. And you can use this as a catalyst to enable many things. One of the, like you said, like you mentioned, the assets that many companies and organizations just throw away, and sort of like data, like you said, one of the most or the easiest example I always bring up is one project that we have where you tokenize weight, for instance. So when you travel, you might perhaps have the right to bring with you two suitcases, right? So 23-kilo suitcases. Most of the times you don't actually use both suitcases. That's actually an asset you're throwing away, right? So that's something that you could monetize essentially and sell to other people that might perhaps need that weight, or otherwise will have paid overweight or had to buy a extra bag, right? So here you have an asset that you're throwing away, and what digital assets allows you is to digitalize this weight and this asset to be able to sell it and monetize it in another way, right? So, and everyone wins, you know, the airplane company, the travel company, and the people traveling as well. This is a use case that we have in Africa, where it is hard for people to find delivery options to remote places. So if you are traveling with two bags and you can allow other people to use that asset as a means to deliver something to their families and such, that's a really good impact on the economy as well. So it's a very easy example to grasp the head around as an asset that everyone throws away once in a while, and there are many assets like it in other contexts, of course.
No, I think it actually would be very advantageous, and if I can please share, ask you to share some of those sort of governance structures that you use. Well, that's the whole idea between smart contracts as well, allowing for that governance structure. I think if you can share something on that, Mateo, because it would be interesting also to hear how you write those governance structure with your mindset of having that incentive. I'm slightly thinking of the fishing project that you will in Chile.
Sure. So just to make it clear as well for everyone. So when you hear the word Web3 and digital assets, you often think of blockchain and Ethereum and all of that, which is what is most popular right now, right? But there's a lot of other solutions and other means to digital assets. One of them is how we do it at Trust Anchor Group, where we have digital identities together with smart contracts and a ledger that we have. So the separation here is, of course, the digital identity that we always have with the whole ecosystem that makes it possible to know your customer rules, AML, and make it sort of enterprise grade, right? So you have a digital asset platform that is enterprise grade that allows you to do a lot of things that are very hard to do in the sort of blockchain space, right? So that's one thing I wanted to clarify, because going into the examples that we have, like sort of what I was talking about earlier about selling weight, then you get all these questions in your mind, like, oh, okay, who am I buying from and all of that, and how can I, for instance, have this on my balance sheet as a company and a corporation? And this is what we empower businesses and individuals at Trust Anchor Group, where we have this digital identity connected to all the transactions and all the things that you do within this Web3 or digital assets space. So with that being said, like you mentioned, the fish farming, the reason I always smile when I hear that project is because the first podcast I did back in 2-3 years ago was talking about the fish farm, and they call me the fish king. so that's, I always think about it when someone brings up the fish farm. But essentially what we do there is, you have Chile in South America. They have the second largest fish farming industry in the world besides Norway, more specifically salmon farming. What we do there is that essentially one fish farm or one salmon farm costs around $25 million to $30 million to establish and to build up, essentially. So what we do there is empower the farmer to gather financial help or finance the whole project with digital assets. So we tokenize or digitalize the whole farm, allowing for different series of tokens, or different series of investment levels, so to speak. So we allow the big investors to come in, but also democratize and fractionalize investment down to $100, meaning that your neighbors, the people around you, the people around the farm and the salmon farm, you allow them and empower them to invest in this type of farming. And the other thing we do, and which is also unique with us at Trust Anchor Group, is this connection to IoT devices and sensors. So you, as a buyer or investor in this farm, you get a real-time monitoring of the fish farm and the salmon farm, where you can see the temperature, the CO2 saturation, and all the really important attributes that may impact the salmon health and impact the environment itself as well. So you get all this data that you have on the salmon farm, because these salmon farms are really advanced, and you have a lot of data that you can see. And what we are doing is essentially allowing everyone, democratizing investment into the salmon farm, and at the same time giving the access to all this data to the investors, so they can see in real time that the asset that they own digitally is being taken care of, is following ESG, is following other types of regulatory compliance in the area, etc., etc. And you have, of course, the history as well. So an investor that wants to sell the holdings in this salmon farm can sell it, and the next one will see, the whole ecosystem and what has happened with the farm, etc., etc. So we are essentially empowering this community of salmon farmers that want to engage in ESG and eco-friendly salmon farming, but don't have the money essentially to build up this whole farm, and want to democratize and allow people to invest in the salmon industry in Chile.
I think this is such a good example, and I just love that project for so many reasons. But you mentioned, right, the sort of transparency and the traceability, and clearly that's a super important part when we're talking about ESG and sustainable investments or impact investments, right? And I think looking at a sector like fast-moving consumer goods, for example, one of the big problems for the big retailers today is not so much just controlling their production line. It's also very much around the logistics, right, and the last miles, and that has proven to be a really tricky part to because clearly if you want to be a big retailer in clothing retail, without naming any names, but you would need to track the entire chain, right? And if you can't control your logistics, that's going to hurt the scope 2, scope 3, etc., which you're going to have to report. And with a higher regulation now coming in, there's ever more demand, right, to not just have the data, but also being able to do something with it and report on it. So it's also a matter of how you handle the data.
Yeah, definitely. And when it comes to the like you said, how you gather the data, who has access to the data, that's something that we also see in the what we do in the fish farm, for example, that and also who is able to audit the data, et cetera, et cetera. For instance, all the digital assets or the tokens that we create from the salmon farm can be audited by third parties, such as salmon industry, whoever governs that area in Chile, but the government as well, or other institutions that you might want to digitally stamp or digitally sign the process as well. So that's something that is possible. And also adds the transparency of things, and you want to see, like you said, the whole chain is not only now of the transportation, but also the first and last mile, like you were saying, how to optimize that, and how to, for instance, we haven't talked about it, but in the fish farm as well, one of the one of the things that is in the roadmap is allowing big investors, or for instance people that consume, or industries that consume a lot of salmon, to kind of buy buy into the salmon farm, and what they get in return is that they know exactly how much salmon they are going to consume, or they are going to get access to in a couple of years, for instance. So they can buy access, future rights to salmon, which essentially helps them to, like you said, efficiency, and what access to salmon they have, and with all the traceability that you have behind the transparency, which the saturation in the water, the CO2 levels, the temperature, etc., then you know what type of fish you have, and the quality of the fish itself, so you can trace it all the way to the plate, essentially, if you wanted to.
But I think this is so central also to the conversation, because obviously when you start a fish farm, you don't necessarily think that you're going to collect all these data points that might be part of your core business, perhaps wasn't even part of your original business plan, right? But now when it means that you de facto could monetize it and do something with it for good reasons, we still see a lot of companies out there are very reluctant to kind of share data, because I think we all come from, the data is so proprietary, and whoever sits on the data is sitting on the gold chest, so to speak. But in reality, we also seen that data is pretty meaningless and pointless if you don't do anything with it. But I guess what here do you see for mechanisms for anyone listening into this call being cautious, thinking, I'm not going to share my data because I don't know where it's going to end up. Maybe my competitors will get my data and that's going to hurt me in the end. So, Mateo, from your perspective and in terms of mechanisms or how to control the data, yet being very open with data, what would you say to that?
Right. Yeah. Just thinking out loud. I mean, you could have when it comes to the salmon industry. Once again, talking about the salmon farm, but so the data they have there is really sensitive data, right? So this is, like you said, is sensitive data, and it could be they could be afraid of sharing the data, and if the data gets into the wrong hands, that could mean a lot of things, right? So what we do there is, together with the digital identities that we have, allow for access rights and authorization based access to the data, and who saw the data and what they saw, etc., etc. And of course you can do synthesization of data. That's not my expertise, but you can do some synthesized data, meaning that you cannot draw conclusions about, for instance, who is behind the data, etc. But many things that you can do is have this authority layer of access to the data, and this is also what we would wanted to touch in the webinar as well, this interoperability, and also how you can be interoperable with other systems, because for instance, if you have it all open, like in Ethereum or blockchain and other types, then it's all open, right? And then you get, and then you have these thoughts about, okay, who's accessing my data? And I cannot change the data because it's in a blockchain. I cannot do any modifications. I cannot delete the data. So that's a lot of big questions that people may have. And this here is where you go into the arguments or the discussions about permission versus open systems on open blockchains, or permissionless as they are called, and who controls the data and the governments around it. So yeah, it's a really good discussion, in my opinion. Well, it depends on the use case, right? So whether you have a permission or permissionless. So there are use cases for permissionless. There are very other use cases for permission databases or blockchains or DLTs. So in my opinion, is based on the use case. But of course, like I said, you could have these instruments or these safeguards in mind, which in the way of authorizing who has access to the data and who interacts with the data all the way.
No, thanks for touching upon that, because there clearly are pros and cons, right, with permissionless. And I think each and every one have to make their own decision as and when they stand with whatever project they want to launch, right? But speaking of that, there's also the layer of coming from the financial industry, right, where all of these things potentially become a security. And here the SEC in the US and Finansinspektionen in Sweden and so on in the EU and are all kind of battling out, I guess, what is a security, right? Because this, the whole notion of Web3 turned things completely upside down. And also you don't have the kind of central clearinghouse as we used to, because that's the whole point, right? To have it more decentralized. But then the onus of the financial regulator is to, I would say, safekeep and look after also the investors, right? So as soon as they feel that someone becomes an investor, then de facto it becomes security. But I would say that there are we're still in the making of the regulation here. So I don't know, from your perspective, Mateo, if you come across what's your thoughts on this topic?
So on the regulation side, or
on the regulation side, what do if anyone in any of your projects have kind of come into difficulties or challenges?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in both ways, right? So of course, we sort of like giving you a background. We have always believed at Trust Anchor Group of this. The name trust, right? So that's why we are called Trust, right? Trust Anchor Group. So we want to inject and incentivize trust in the system, and for us it has never been of disrupting the economy or disrupting anything. It has always been about enhancing, making automatizations, making things better and smarter. So that's how our thought process has been, not to disrupt or to replace or to do anything of that nature. It has been always of making things smarter and better. With that being said, like I said, we make use of digital identities, which allows us to do the KYCs, the AMLs, and all these compliance procedures, and being regulatory compliant, which has been really great. And we always have seen ourselves as this enterprise grade, kind of tech partner for organizations, for businesses, how do you say that in English? For governments, right? For governments and other types of organizations. So that's has been always in the backbone of our thinking. But of course, as now MiCA is coming, and other regulations, and we work all across the globe. So you have different regulations, for instance, in Chile and Brazil, in Colombia, in the US, and in Europe. So, and in SEC, like you mentioned, if they think that it looks like, it smells like, and it walks like a security, then there is a security. Why do we have to, embark on another regulation? And why do we have to do that when we already have a regulation that, in their words, works, right? But yeah, so and I think it is really hard to strike a balance between innovation and regulation, and I think that will be the challenge to the lawmakers, because if you have too much regulation, then regulations, then you kill innovation, and if you have too much innovation, then perhaps something happens. Actually, I'm gonna steal this one from Peter Baher, which is our CTO. Yeah, we was actually talking about this the other day, and he said when he learned to be a pilot back in the days, they were reading a book which was this thick, and he said, yeah, every book, every law in that book is behind every law in that book, there's a person dead, right? Meaning that you had to do something wrong in order to have the law and legislation, rights, and it's kind of counter or reactive, and it's always been like that. Well, not always, but most of the cases in many realms and many other contexts as well, that you allow people to innovate, and then when they go out of boundary and something bad happens, then you regulate. I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying how it's been before. But like I said, it will be interesting to see this kind of balance between the innovation and regulations.
Excellent point there, and I think I will borrow that one from you as well going forward, to be honest. But I think we can absolutely say that Web3 is here, and it's in its making, right? And when it comes to companies out there in the Web2 wanting or trying to make the bridging into Web3, right? There is a possibility of ring fencing projects, and I think starting dipping your toe. And for sure, there are things to consider, like we were talking about, whether you're going to be in a proprietary protocol, a permission, or an open source permissionless protocol, or in terms of interoperability and the things around data, how much should you share, and how would you like to share it, and for that matter, smart contracts is one thing, but the whole governance structure needs to be implemented by kind of the real business thinking, right? There is no standardized protocol. Right. And then we come into the whole traceability in terms also, not just things happening on the distributed ledger, but also in terms of obviously who are the people or the actors behind, right? And there the whole identity checks comes in. And obviously, if you're leaning towards anything that smells, looks, and walks like security, you're into the whole regulated space as well. But I would like to say that I come across consultants, we come across companies, not least Tag, obviously, that already are doing these projects. So from my standpoint, I certainly encourage people to start kind of really try and test, right, and be guided through these processes. Because the nice thing is you don't have to transform your entire business, right?
Definitely.
You start with one thing. And in terms of impact and sustainable investments, and I think we can all agree that that's where the world is heading. I think 10 years from now, we're not going to talk about sustainable investments. Everything's going to have to be sustainable, and then it's kind of the rest. And that's also where the regulation is pushing us. So there's not much of a choice. So there, and I think, Mateo, maybe you can share, you have a nice forestry project as well, because I think it's always nice to kind of tie it all back into the real world.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like you said, ESG now is a big thing, and for obvious reasons, of course. And there are a lot of cool projects, but in every project, I think I have a little flyer flying around here. So in every project and every aspect, like you said, people are they want trust, they want this transparency, and I think it boils down to that. I mean, you can argue, of course, that when you make a payment with your regular card and all of that, you don't see every transaction, you don't see what's going on behind, but it's still, you have trust in a way of having a bank that is supposed to follow the laws, that is supposed to, keep every logs, etc., etc. So you put your trust in that. What Web3 has done and what DLTs have done is that you put trust in the decentralized matter, in our case, digital identities, in the smart contracts that are both human but also machine readable, that you can read. That's where you put your trust. So essentially, you have to put your trust in something. And when it comes to ESG, I mean, we have seen a lot of projects coming up. When you plant trees for carbon emissions, for instance, where you issue carbon credits, and a lot of them, or some of them, have ended up being useless, basically. So you have, I read a couple of studies in California, where they had these mangrove trees, where you plant them in hopes that in 10 to 20 years you have taken X amount of CO2 from the atmospheres, and 10 years later and 15 years later, they have done studies and basically saying that they were useless. And here's where data comes in, and here's where live monitoring comes in, and the trust of everything. So you can do this by monitoring stuff and taking satellite pictures, perhaps, and all of that, and perhaps IoTs everywhere, or sensors everywhere, and have a disconnection to digital assets. The way we do it, and I'm going to bring up Creturner as an example. Creturner is a company that work with us. They have this what I called a reversed coal mine. So basically, they take biomass and wet biomass, to be more specific, and with a process called I think it's pyrolysis in pyrolyze, I think in English. Basically, they heat up the wet biomass, and it becomes active coal, right, or coal. This coal they take and put down old coal mines, so to seal them out. And the thing here is that you know exactly how much CO2 or potential CO2 you are taken from the atmosphere because of the weight of the biomass, for instance. So you have this whole process, and it's a really cool idea. And from here, you can issue carbon credits and all of that. But what we essentially allow them to do is to create this transparency. So yeah, I'm putting money into Creturner, I'm buying a certificate, but how do I know that I actually compensated, right? So what we do is digitalize this whole process, creating digital copies and digital assets out of the certificates linked to the process itself. So you have IoT sensors monitoring the whole process, and you have, as an investor or buyer of these carbon credits, a whole insight into the process. You can live in your digital asset, in your token, can actually see where in the process your compensation is at right now. And this allows people to trust in the system, instead of planting a tree and in 10 years later it comes out that it didn't do anything. So this sort of trust and transparency is what we allow them to do, using, like we were talking about earlier, the data.
No, that's great, Mateo. And I think it's such a nice project. But you mentioned one word, token, that we haven't spoken so much about. So there's always the question, right? Does everything needs to be tokenized? And if not, why not? And you said this is a project where you have used tokenomics or tokenized, right?
Right.
So why did you decide to do that, rather than, one other option is having kind of open APIs, I suppose, and people can dab into the project. But yeah, if you can share it with us.
Yeah, definitely. So here, the incentive. So basically, in the carbon market, it's a carbon credit market. You buy carbon credits, right? And you can essentially sell them in the second-hand market as well. That's a market that's booming or will boom as credit as carbon emissions rise, of course, and as we try and like you mentioned, the regulations are heading that way. So when you buy into this, so you get a token, which is essentially a digital representation of your carbon credit or your carbon emission rights, or in this case, carbon credits. So why we tokenize this? So we believe that in this case, with tokenization, you allow for a larger liquidity, transparency. I mean, when you tokenize something, you use smart contracts. In the smart contracts that we use is like I mentioned briefly before, they are human and machine readable, meaning that they are not just programmable code in a blockchain. They are actually human readable, as we human know the concept of contracts. So you can actually read and see exactly what this token entitles you to for rights or benefits, or who is legally liable if something goes wrong, etc., etc. So in this way, and the creation of the token uses this type of smart contracts together with digital identities, right? So you sign this contract, and you can have third-party auditors that can digitally stamps. And so to summarize it, it makes it easier for accountability. It makes it easier for liquidity. So if you want to sell and in a second-hand market, or if I want to, I don't want this carbon credit anymore, or I see that it goes up in price, I can sell it in the second-hand market, or if it goes down in price as well. So it allows for a greater traceability as well. So what happens nowadays is greenwashing and when you count credits double counting. Is the issue. So if in the regular carbon credit market, if I buy a credit, I can essentially sell it and double count the offset. And this is a big problem within the carbon credit market. But if you have a ledger or a distributed ledger in this case, and identities, you know exactly when it's sold and who owns it all the time, and you see the record of it. So you cannot have this greenwashing or this double counting issue in this ecosystem.
Wonderful, Mateo. So any questions or comments or what have you? Like to see if anyone has anything. Otherwise, I'd like to say we have addressed the point where we talked about sustainability and impact projects, right? And how basically these digital assets can really help provide the transparency and traceability that perhaps is lacking in the more traditional ways of doing it. And we also talked about very much how you can kind of look to onboard such a projects, right? And TAG is clearly one facilitator in this, right? Where as was mentioned, address whether it's going to be permissionless, the pros and cons with different protocols or open source, and the interoperability and the whole trust and being able to verify. And Mateo was also talking about the AML, anti-money laundering, and KYC, know your clients, right? And we touched upon the whole tokenomics in the sense of why do we need it, and why do we have it, and where does it make sense and perhaps less sense. But I think there is no doubt that this is a super interesting and very fast growing area. And Sweden is behind, as we heard, Hong Kong and Asia, in Southeast Asia, as I see it, also Singapore, the Middle East as well, with Dubai and UAE is well on the forefront, and so is the US, right? So I think Europe is somewhat catching up from behind. But I think just, start, try and test, and you can ring fence a smaller project and get going, and that's the best way of doing it.
Yeah, definitely. If I may add something there as well, I mean, we have always tried to, I've seen a lot of Web3 projects, and in the beginning it was this hype of blockchain, Web3, and talking all of this. What is a token and digital asset? For us, like I said in the beginning, the beauty of it all, it has to do, at least for us and for me, more specific, has to do with this how do I interact with value and with assets in a digital format, the way as I interact with information. So how do I make it simple, automation, traceability, all of that. If it is a distributed ledger in the background, if it is a blockchain, if it is another in the background, for me, it doesn't matter, right? So for us, it's this automation, optimization, and traceability and transparency, and building this trust behind our process. That's for us the key in this whole thing. It happens to be a distributed ledger in the background, fine, but for us, it's just this, bringing these opportunities and making a smarter future for everyone, to interact and to trade and to buy and to sell and to interact with value in the internet. That's what I think, at least.
We got a question here from the audience, sort of wanting to have an example of potential opportunity for Swedish companies in Hong Kong within digital assets. But the one that springs to mind immediately for me is obviously Hong Kong being a massive port, right? And with being a shipping hub for many of the products that we import, I think that is kind of one potential area for Swedish companies, kind of relating back to Hong Kong and where it could be sort of having that traceability, right? When looking at importing. I don't know if Mateo, if you have.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I agree completely. So with using identities and digital wallets, we have another project where you put actually you optimize last and first and last mile. So you put an identity together with a wallet in a package, and with smart contracts, meaning that you have predefined conditions and predefined terms of how this package should be delivered. You could have, for instance, the transport have to be eco-friendly, it has to be this temperature, it has to be within 2 days, etc., etc. The package itself can actually publish itself on a marketplace and say, oh, sort of like a Uber, right? So, hi, I'm here, I have to go to this place and you have to meet these conditions. If you meet those conditions, anyone can take you there, right? So and when you finalize the delivery, the package will pay its own way forward, right? Because you have a wallet in the package and you have an identity. So everyone touching or interacting with the package, whether it's a machine or a person, will have this traceability all the way, and the package will automate this whole process based on the predefined conditions.
No, and for me also, coming more from the financial side, I think the whole DeFi, word that's perhaps less used, but decentralized finance, is also when it comes to lending and financing opportunities cross-border, how that also can be facilitated through DLT with the traceability, and actually prevent a lot of the traditional perhaps anti-money laundering issues and financial crime that is actually occurring. So I think we'll see much more on the cross-border front when it comes to financing as well, and trade finance, project financing, etc.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we do have like the Salmon project. Once again, that's a project financing a project, right? So we use smart contracts with escrow functionality, sort of. So you have these state machines that you can configure in this smart contract, meaning that you have your whole flow, and you can say, okay, so the money is gathered within the smart contract and it is released based upon conditions, and that conditions could be in the case of transportation, it could be when the package is delivered, right? So pay and deliver. In the case of payments, it could be that I sign that I want to receive a payment now, or it has a lot of usable places, so to speak.
Okay, with that, if no further questions, that I think we'll round off with saying again, just go and try.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Hanna. Thank you, Anton.
Always a pleasure, Mateo, talking to you, and stay tuned, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Bye.